Can you really handle housework while working full-time? Poor David.
As Susan made her snide remarks, David simply sat there laughing. Even though we had thoroughly discussed and agreed on working full-time together, he didn't back me up at all. Taking advantage of this, Susan's harassment escalated, and I reached the limit of my patience. My love for David disappeared as he continued to do nothing and refused to support me, leaving me increasingly frustrated. My name is Emily, and I've been married for 3 years. My husband, David, and I both work full-time, and we don't have any kids yet. I do want children soon, especially since my biological clock is ticking. But to be honest, I feel uneasy about raising a child in our current situation. The main reason is David's relationship with his mom, Susan. David and I decided together that I would continue working after getting married. However, Susan seems eager for us to have kids as soon as possible.
When are you having a baby? I want to see my grandchild.
She brings it up every time we see her. At first, I gave polite, vague answers. I figured she didn't mean any harm and was simply excited about having a grandchild. But when it kept happening dozens of times, I started to feel like she was blaming me for not having kids. One day, I mustered up the courage to explain. I want to focus on my career a bit more right now. And we're still newlyweds, and I'd like to enjoy some time with just the two of us. I really thought Susan would understand. Instead, her face twisted in a way I'll never forget, and she looked at me as if I'd said something outrageous.
A woman's true joy is in staying home and taking care of her family.
She went on to lecture me for an hour. When I told her I wasn't planning to quit my job, she started treating me like the enemy. I regretted speaking up, but it was too late to take it back. Since then, Susan has been cold toward me and constantly makes snide remarks.
It must be tough having a wife who works full-time. Poor David, he doesn't even get to relax at home. Imagine being exhausted from work and still having to do chores. Emily, it's like you were born the wrong gender.
Susan says things like this even in front of David, but all he does is laugh it off. Doesn't it bother you when she says stuff like that? I asked David when we were alone.
That's just how Mom is.
However, David just says that and doesn't do anything to resolve the situation. After we got married, I realized that David basically does whatever Susan says. If she says go right, he goes right. If she says go left, he goes left. The only time David ever seemed to go against Susan's wishes was when he married me. Back then, he cared about me more than he does now and would at least listen to me occasionally. But now our relationship feels more like that of a parent and child. And it's only been 3 years since we got married. We had decided together to both work full-time, but I end up doing nearly all the housework. David relies on me for everything. Before we got married, we had agreed to share the household chores, but now he not only leaves all the housework to me, he even relies on me to handle his personal matters.
Where's my shirt? Oh, and I need you to take care of these documents for work. They need to be submitted.
He leaves everything to me, and watching David depend on me for absolutely everything makes me feel like I'm living with a big child. It wasn't like this before we got married. David has changed for the worse since we got married. I suppose it's my fault for not seeing it sooner, but maybe this was just who he really was all along. I repeatedly told him to handle his own responsibilities, but he only does it right after I remind him. The cycle keeps repeating, and in the end, David hasn't changed at all. I thought there might still be hope if David would at least call Susan out on her nasty remarks. But instead, he sides with her.
Emily's only purpose in life is her job.
David laughs while making comments that only pour fuel on the fire. When we got home, I confronted him, and he gave me another hollow apology.
There was nothing else I could have done in that situation.
The truth is, David probably doesn't want me to quit my job because it gives us financial stability. But if he were to admit that, Susan's criticism and attacks would be directed at him instead. So to avoid becoming her target, he chooses to take her side. Thinking about spending the rest of my life with someone like David honestly fills me with unease. Some might say, then just get a divorce. But I can't bring myself to make that decision. I've vented to my married friends before, but they told me that it's the same in most households. Hearing that made me wonder if it's enough to live a tolerable life without big fights, infidelity, or abuse. There are still times I enjoy being with David, and not everything is bad. I'm caught between thinking this might be good enough and wondering if I can really accept things as they are. While I was struggling with these thoughts, Susan's harassment kept escalating. Recently, she went so far as to make a duplicate key and started entering our home without permission. She would even throw away pre-cooked meals I had prepared to make my life easier, saying they didn't taste good. On top of that, she would go into our bedroom without asking, inspecting what I bought, what clothes I own, and more. There isn't a person in the world who wouldn't be upset by this kind of behavior. So I asked Susan to return the spare key, but of course she refused to do so willingly. When I asked David for help, he wouldn't take any action. Instead, he either pushed all the difficult tasks onto me or avoided the situation altogether. As for Susan, she harassed me simply because she didn't like that I wouldn't follow her demands. In this kind of environment, having a child felt like nothing more than an impossible dream. Maybe I've reached the limit of what I can take in this marriage. One day, while I was pondering this, David contacted me to tell me that Susan had broken a bone. On top of that, David sounded panicked as he said,
Mom's going to need surgery. She won't be able to walk for a while.
Susan's injury required hospitalization, partly due to her age. She was expected to stay in the hospital for about a month, so small visits with gifts would suffice. But I was told that she would require caregiving after being discharged. After that, I began visiting Susan in the hospital after work and on weekends. I would have preferred David to take on this responsibility, but due to his work schedule, I had no choice but to go. Even so, I felt it was still better than the way things had been before. Susan no longer barged into our home uninvited, and our interactions were brief during hospital visits. I could simply deliver what I needed to and leave right away. But the real issue was what would happen after she was discharged. David and I both work full-time and live separately from Susan. However, once she returned home, someone would need to help her with daily tasks. Since David's father had already passed away, Susan would be living alone in her house. I decided to hire a home aide to help during the day. But Susan, being as difficult as ever, insisted that she didn't want strangers in her home.
You're my daughter-in-law. You should take care of me. There's no need to hire anyone.
Honestly, I thought it would have been easier if she continued to treat me like an outsider. For Susan, This was the perfect opportunity to push me to quit my job. I discussed this with David, but as expected, he said he didn't want to handle caregiving. Somehow, he started steering the conversation toward making it seem like I should be the one to take care of Susan. She's your mother, I argued, but David came up with a bizarre justification.
That's exactly why I don't want to take care of her.
At that point, I told David about all the harassment I had endured from Susan over the years. The only reason I managed hospital visits was because the interactions were short, and even then, I would have preferred not to do it at all. The thought of providing full-time care for Susan during the day made my skin crawl. This isn't just about whether I quit my job or not. When I said that, David sulked and retreated to the bedroom. David was clearly just trying to avoid being involved in anything troublesome. By the day before Susan's discharge, we still hadn't reached an agreement, and the tension between us was palpable. Susan is David's mother, and I had no reason to help someone who had treated me so badly. So I finally told David, who was dodging the conversation, I'm not helping this time. Before I knew it, the day of Susan's discharge has arrived. As I prepared for work as usual, I couldn't help but wonder how Susan's care would be managed starting today. Then David, dressed in his suit, said something unbelievable.
Take the day off and take care of Mom.
I couldn't believe my ears, but David left the house without another word. I rushed after him, calling out, I told you I'm not taking care of Susan. Even if I take today off, what about tomorrow? Without stopping, David responded,
Just quit your jobs. It's easier that way.
Hearing his careless, selfish, and completely irresponsible words, I watched his back as he walked away, and suddenly, I felt like nothing mattered anymore. I went back inside and called my workplace to take the day off. However, this isn't to care for Susan. It is to use my paid leave to start preparing for a divorce. Afterward, I explained the situation to my parents and arranged for them to help me move my essentials out of the house. While I was packing, David and Susan called me multiple times, but I ignored every single call and continued working. Once everything was moved, I left with my parents and returned to their home. For an entire week, calls and emails from David came in every few minutes, but I ignored all of them. Once I had everything prepared, I contacted David for the first time in a while. Then, David begged me desperately, almost in tears.
Help me. I can't take care of Mom on my own. The house is a mess, the laundry's piling up, and I can't even cook. I'm sorry, just come back, please.
From what he told me, since I'd left, he had been going to Susan's house every day after work to help her. But he couldn't handle Susan's unreasonable demands and admitted that today he was ignoring her entirely. He apologized, saying he relied on me too much, but it was clear he thought everything would somehow work out if I returned. I could see right through his intentions. So I asked him, Are you saying I should come back and take care of Susan?
I'll help as much as I can.
As expected, David said exactly what I wanted to hear. Empty, reassuring words. It was clear he planned to leave everything to me, and when I pressed him further, he mumbled awkwardly, If we both pitch in, we can manage. David continued to string together such half-hearted excuses. This exchange solidified my belief that my decision was the right one. So, I firmly and decisively told him, I can't do this anymore. I'm filing for divorce. I'll be bringing a lawyer and the divorce papers soon. David was silent for a moment after my words. Then, after a few seconds of silence, he muttered in disbelief.
This can't be happening. It's impossible.
I expressed my frustration, telling David that his attitude and everything I had endured from Susan had pushed me to my limit.
I'm sorry.
David repeatedly apologized, clinging to me while sobbing uncontrollably. I don't want a divorce. I don't want to lose you. I'll do anything. If he had been standing in front of me, I probably would have kicked him. That's how furious I was with his behavior, and I no longer felt even the slightest trace of love for him. If he was willing to do anything, he should have been supporting me from the start. A few days later, I went to our house with my lawyer, where David was waiting. The house was a mess, clearly neglected, and David himself looked completely worn out. As soon as he saw me, he spoke in a broken voice, looking defeated.
I have to go to Mom's house because if I don't, she calls my workplace. It's taking such a toll on me mentally.
Seeing him like that, I realized once again how utterly incapable he was. Why did I ever marry a man like this? You could have just hired a helper and been done with it. But no, you chose to do everything Susan's way, didn't you? And then you tried to dump all of it on me, even expecting me to quit my job to look after her full time. I spat the words at him, and David lowered his head.
But I don't want a divorce. I'll do anything.
Will you really do anything? When I asked, David's face lit up with hope.
Yes, anything.
Then sign this. But with those words, I swiftly handed him the divorce papers. It was the perfect example of going from heaven to hell. After that, David simply nodded along to the lawyer's explanations and signed the divorce papers. Right now, David is probably realizing just how much he dumped Susan's responsibilities onto me. He's likely regretting how he avoided dealing with Susan's care and tried to escape by leaving it all to me. But at this point, I couldn't care less. As David signed the divorce papers through his tears, I offered him one final piece of advice. Just ignore whatever Susan says. David looked at me with a stunned expression, but I think he understood what I meant. A week later, Susan called my parents' house. I had already blocked her number on my phone, so she must have resorted to calling their landline.
Please, go back to David. I'm struggling here. If this goes on, David's going to abandon me. Please help me.
From what she said, David had completely stopped listening to her since the divorce and was ignoring all her attempts to contact him. She complained that he wouldn't answer her calls, and even when she called his workplace, they refused to let her speak to him. Furthermore, she was told that if she continued contacting his workplace, they would report her to the police. Susan pleaded through tears over the phone.
I can't go grocery shopping. I can't take care of myself, and I haven't even been able to use the bathroom or take a bath in over a week.
She acted like the tragic victim, clinging to me for help. I was certain she didn't think for a moment that her behavior had brought this upon herself. Calmly, I told her, "You brought this on yourself. This is just the consequences of your actions coming back to you. After all the harassment you put me through, don't come running to me for help when you're in trouble." I hung up the phone and promptly blocked her number from my parents' landline as well. After that, I moved on with my life and quickly forgot about Susan. A few months later, I happened to run into someone who knew David and heard an update. Susan had been completely abandoned by David, who even changed his phone number and moved without telling her. She had turned to other relatives for help, but they refused to take on the responsibility, and she ultimately ended up in a care facility. I also learned that Susan, devastated by being abandoned by her son and unable to handle her life alone, had become so emotionally broken that she barely spoke anymore. Even after hearing about this tragic ending, I couldn't see it as anything other than the consequences of Susan's own actions. There was nothing to be learned from her, but at the very least, I knew I didn't want my life to end the way hers did. That's why I've decided to live as honestly as possible and treat others with kindness moving forward.